college football is back, baby. We're back. The Big 12's back. And the Big 12, not a great weekend, not a great showing. I think definitely expectations weren't met, but bad vibes aside, it is so awesome to have college football back. I'm hyped. And now I'm here with Drew Russell. He's here in Washington, D.C. I mean, we're all around the country here covering this national conference now. It's outstanding stuff.
Hey, I'm just here in DC, Brandon, just checking out potential future locations for the Big 12 for institutions. I mean, we're a global coast to coast conference these days, so we might as well do our research, right?
There you go. I mean, there's no stone left unturned under this new Big 12 era. I might sweep, head up north to Connecticut, see how the Huskies are doing, see if they're
Yeah,
a good
I'll
fit.
go yell at ESPN in the process as well
Absolutely.
about their little television deals.
What a disaster that is. Also, speaking of TV disasters, have you seen, have you paid much attention to that new Fox score graphic in the bottom of the
Oh,
screen? What a disaster.
yeah, I couldn't believe it when I saw um, an unnamed game on Thursday night on Fox regarding just that those logos were brutal. I don't like. You have no idea, Brandon, how badly I want to be in charge of a score bug. Like that
Yeah.
would low key be a dream of mine to be like, hey, and I'm not a big graphic design guy, but if they said Drew one should be in charge of putting together a quality score bug, I'd be all in. And it
Hey,
sure wouldn't be what Fox put out on Thursday or what they're putting out for football this year.
I mean, they really doubled down on it. I was hoping like maybe they see how bad this looks and they'll adjust for the weekend. Maybe they'll adjust for week 2. I wouldn't bet on it, but I mean, we know who the teams are. You don't have to put a 4-inch
No,
logo on it. We can read
no,
the screen.
yeah, you can read the
We're,
screen, and it looks outrageous too. Like, I mean, the way the logos eat into the picture a little bit, like of the game.
yeah.
I'm not a fan even remotely. I don't know who signed off on it. Maybe test groups. Clearly, they had enough positive feedback. I mean, they're not just willy nilly. It's two guys saying this is it, and everybody agrees. Like they had feedback, but
Well, and I can see the
they
confusion
asked the wrong people.
because objectively it does look pretty cool, I guess, but it's not very functional. It's not
Right.
the scorebook doesn't have to look cool. It's just make it look clean, put in some colors so we know which team is what, put a little dot on the screen so we know who has the ball, timeouts, clock, quarter. You get it. Like it's not that hard. It seems like they put in so much effort to make it worse, and it is what it is.
The old scoreboards back in it's hard to believe the evolution of the scoreboard, and I'm not going to dig too deep into this, but shoot, I mean, scoreboards weren't even on the screen
No,
regularly just 30 years ago. It just would flash in every once in a while. You'd be like, you could often turn on a game and shoot, you'd have no idea what the score is for like 2 to 5 minutes unless you had a radio or something like that. You just kind of had to wait, or hopefully the announcer said it. But yeah, they used to not show, and now like they've gotten more complicated every year, and now it's like just clean it back. Simplicity is usually at its best on the scorebook.
you said it best. It doesn't have to be flashy, just functional, and yeah, it's getting out of
Yeah,
control.
yeah.
But football is back. Score bugs are not the Big 12. Not exactly what I was expecting for sure. When I was kind of going through the conference and seeing how it would play out, I didn't feel great about it. I'm like, well, I don't know much
Mm-hmm.
about these new 4 schools and how that transition is going to be for them. I like Cincinnati. New head coach is tough. UCF. How do they adjust? And then Houston and BYU. Good good ball clubs, but I'm just not sure how that transition is going to work. And then we have Oklahoma and Texas, who are expected to make huge jumps from last year. It's like, well, that's tough to see how much of that is just stars on a recruiting sheet, and how much of that is actual football. And then I felt like I had a pretty good feeling on the Hateful Eight. A lot of good teams, lot of teams that I think would take a step up. Maybe I was wrong about that. Maybe I got the new 4 teams right, Texas and Oklahoma right, and I got the Hateful Eight wrong because TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech. I mean, I can't believe it.
No, all of those losses were just brutal in their own way. And TCU, they ran into a buzzsaw in Colorado. Colorado is going to be the hot topic all week in college football, and rightfully so. I mean, to go for a 1-11 season last year, Deion Sanders comes in, he mixes up this entire thing. Everybody rightfully, there is some doubters out there, and they go into a team that made a national title game last year, and offensively were unstoppable. Had players that just stood out. Hunter's the main headliner, rightfully so. This kid just played out of his mind. But they're a talented football team, especially offensively. Sanders can really throw the rock. And I don't think TCU has anything to be like legitimately ashamed of, because Colorado, I think, is a quality football team. That said, they are going to have to clean up that defensive side of the football and relatively quick, because there were some mistakes coverage wise on Saturday. Though Sanders had some great throws too. Like, I'm not to take away anything from there. So TCU kind of you can kind of forgive them to an extent, even though losing at home is always brutal. Baylor was the one that stood out to me as a heavily disappointing one. To give up 42 at home to Texas State's pretty brutal. Dave Arnetta, I mean, they won back in 2021 with the Big 12. So to kind of go from that, just brutal. And then that Tech Wyoming game, that goes to OT. Wyoming, they're just riding those mountain vibes. I mean, that place was sheer energy on a late Saturday night. Laramie gets pretty weird, I guess. And that's how it played out. So 10-4 weekend for the Big 12. And they did pick up some nice wins too, so you have to respect that. But no other way to put it. A pretty disappointing effort. And both of our upset picks, they turned out to win in the end, or that we were both wrong. So hey, we have some improvement on our end too, Brandon.
Yeah, it looks like you got one, I got one, and we'll certainly go over our picks for better or for worse here in a bit. But TCU definitely, I think, the big headline, and it's so tough because it's week one to really get a beat on what happened there. Because I'm a Colorado fan, of course. I'm pretty optimistic about Coach Prime and this whole thing that he's got going on, because we've never seen anything like it before. Rebuilding a whole team in one off season. I mean, this is a new day and age, and we've never seen it done before. And going into it, I'm like, well, if there's anybody who could pull this off, it's Coach Prime. I mean, he gets you to buy in, and once you buy in, everything else is just cake from there. So even in my most optimistic, view, I didn't expect them to be TCU. Frankly, I don't think anybody did, except Rico on TikTok. This guy Rico knows. He's been calling this all off season, and he has a great breakdown of, of course, Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter get the majority of the headlines when it comes to this transfer class, but they also rebuilt their offensive line with good talents, as far as like two starters on from Kent State's offensive line, who that offensive line as a whole only gave up 17 sacks last year total. They rebuilt their defensive line with a lot of really talented pieces that maybe just didn't work out at bigger schools, or developed really quickly at some of the smaller schools, and are ready for this big time college football. I mean, he's been calling it all offseason. He's like, they're definitely going to cover, and they're probably going to win, or at least, be in the thick of it at the end. And, hats off to him. That was an incredibly bold prediction. Because, like I said, I'm a Colorado fan. I wouldn't have even gone on. I think when I did my season, predictions, I had them going 2-10, at 3-10, 3-9 max. I mean, outstanding stuff. I can't believe it. Now, I also don't want to take away too much from TCU, because, like you said, it is a national championship team from a year ago. They do lose a lot of pieces. It was also very funny, as I ingrained myself in Arkansas Twitter last year. TCU fans getting the Kendall Briles experience, where you're watching the game and you're just pulling your hair out, like, this is awful. What are we doing? And then you look back at the stat line, and you're like, well, they put up 42 points. Chandler Morris threw for 300 yards. I mean, they're not going to find him.
Amani Bailey ran for 180, man. Like, they had a great day offensively.
It certainly didn't feel like it at the time, which is insane.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
feel like it's
Shoot, even their rush defense was pretty solid.
yeah,
They didn't really give up any big chunks of plays. And Colorado, I had less than 2 yards per carry. So they didn't really damage them, but on the ground. But that pass defense and Colorado had 4 different receivers with a 100+ yard games,
that's
which is
crazy.
pretty remarkable. I mean, they did it. They had a great game plan. TCU had never really, they had no idea what to really expect. So, I mean, their coaching staff, they were kind of going in somewhat, you know, dry, like we'll find out what happens. And that was the situation right there that it didn't work out on their end. But Colorado played a great game, a future Big 12 member. I want to give a shout out as well. This will be the last time they can pull this off. The Pac-12 in its final year is undefeated right now. Every team has won.
Great.
Yeah, every other conference has at least 2 losses. Pac-12 just like it's our swan song. We're gonna just live in the glory.
Took care of business, and it's not like they just. I mean, obviously, Colorado went to Fort Worth and played there. I'm trying to think of any other like Power 5 matchups in the Big 12. I mean, USC obviously cleaned house. They're the big ones.
Yeah,
Washington took care of Boise State really easy. Oregon State pulled away yesterday pretty
yeah.
well. Yeah, a lot
Yeah,
of
no, I mean,
really big wins.
definitely, definitely interesting just how that played out. But yeah, I mean, for including the 4 new schools that are going to be coming from that to the Big 12 next year, and will be mentioned sparingly or a few times throughout this season, but definitely more next year. Definitely a good weekend for them in Colorado. After some doubts of this program hasn't done a lot, they're making a statement of look out, we're coming, and it should be they're going to be you'll watch every week this season. It might blow up halfway through, but you're going to watch, and that's hey, Colorado football usually nobody usually goes out of their way normally to watch. So that's an accomplishment in itself.
And talk about the bet that Fox put on Colorado. That whole big noon kickoff was just such a Coach Prime propaganda piece, and it paid off. They're like, hey, this guy's special. We're gonna tell this story, even if we have to tell it 100 times, and we're gonna get you invested in Coach Prime. And I'm like, well, there's a coach on the other side who just played for a national championship in his first
I
year.
know.
You
Yeah.
can't get him. I mean, I know he's not as charismatic as Coach Prime. Pretty close, I'd say. You know, they're on the same level, but Coach Prime got
Yeah.
a charismatic edge there. But I'm like, this guy's actually like accomplished something at the highest level in college football. But no, they were right. They were like, we're putting we're going all in on Coach Prime, and boy, is it paying off. Because they could, I mean, imagine if TCU did cover and they just stunk. I was like, well,
Yeah.
I mean, then next week gets so much more damaged with Colorado, Nebraska. I'm sure that they have like a Colorado, Oregon, Colorado, USC game on
Yep.
the horizon if they can take care of business next week as well. I mean, exciting stuff. And I mean, yeah, they did beat a Big 12 team, but I think that is a huge net win for the Big 12 as far as Colorado being
Yeah.
good. I think from a Big 12 standpoint, you'd rather TCU lose here on Fox Big Noon Kickoff, but then
Hmm.
we're bringing Colorado next year. We don't want them to stink, and if they're as exciting as they are this year,
Yep.
outstanding win for the conference.
Yeah. Indeed. Indeed. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see going forward how TCU bounces back as well, because this is a disappointing week 1 loss just based on, hey, we have some doubters, we want to prove them wrong. And to lose, I don't care. Lose any game. That's football. You prep, you do all this energy, this work, a lot of anticipation, hype. Fort Worth, really good energy on Saturday. And to lose, that's always a tough gut punch. We'll see how they react.
Yeah, and I don't think that TCU's bad by any means. I definitely
Mm-hmm.
think they'll get better as the year goes on, because and this was why I was so sure that teams like Nebraska were going to be able to compete with Minnesota and so on and so forth. It feels easier to just rebuild everything. Like when everything's brand new, everybody's on the same page. Everybody, is accustomed to the new way of thinking, like we saw yesterday with Colorado, or saw Saturday with Colorado. But when you're TCU and you have some pieces that are the same, and you have some pieces that are different, you lose your starting quarterback, you lose your first round wide receiver, you lose your NFL running back, and then plugging in those pieces with the new system, but it's still under the Sonny Dykes umbrella. Like, it just seems like things can get miscombobulated. I think they'll get better as the year goes on for sure. I still have them as like an 8, probably like a 7-8 win team. And I think this will be like
Mm-hmm.
the floor for TCU going forward because they're not going to lose that much production year to year.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll really see what TCU's floor looks like here. But I don't, because another narrative that I've seen, especially because I'm so ingrained in Husker Twitter, is, well, TCU stinks. TCU doesn't
Mm-hmm.
stink. Chandler Morris is still, he's going to be just fine. Um, the offensive and defensive lines have to get a little bit better cohesion. They're really big and strong and talented, but they just didn't seem like they were really getting after it the way that I
Mm-hmm.
think TCU fans expected. And then, the Kendall Briles experience. It's just a roller coaster.
It's the worst and best experience a fan can have in any given week, because about 3 times a week he'll draw a genius play call, and then about 5 times a week it'll be, what is going on?
Pulling your hair out. What are we doing here?
Yep, madman Kendall Briles. I'm calling him the madman rest of the season. Book it.
And then TCU did get let off the hook pretty easily once Baylor went down to Texas State at home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Texas State, another team who was real aggressive in the transfer portal. I think outside of Colorado, they probably made the most roster changes, and it showed
Mm-hmm.
up. Texas State was awesome, and Baylor. I mean, Dave Aranda's he's warming up his seat pretty well here.
Yeah.
I didn't think he was on the hot seat coming in, but after kicks, you think, okay, well, you lose all this talent from the Big 12 title team. You take a step back, you lose some close games. Disappointing year, but it is what it is. We'll come back next year, and then all this excitement, like, okay, well, now we're back. We're ready to take that next step. And then a stinker week 1 against Texas State at home.
Yeah. Well, pretty amazing too that the defense was just porous. I mean, they give up nearly 300 yards passing. They give about 40 yards, 5 yards on the ground. They struggled. They played with very little energy, especially defensively. I mean, it jumped down by 15 at halftime, and I think they fought better in the second half. But give Texas State a lot of credit. Great staff that, rebuilding their team pretty much through the portal, which, again, this era, it's not a 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or really pretty much the eternity of college football before it. You were stuck with what you were given usually. So you just had to make the best of it. You hope your players could come in. And that's why fans usually have pretty good patience for 4 to 5 years. Now you can rebuild on the fly. That said, still it's an inexcusable loss for Baylor just based on expectations for the season, and one that they're going to have to readjust quickly. And again, from the Big 12 standpoint, they need these wins. These non-conference games really do matter. And it does, they always talk about perception of conferences and all that. And this is one where it does hurt the perception of the conference or team that, was definitely viewed as a middle-class team this season, definitely was viewed in that upper echelon. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel about Texas Tech too, is that it really just kind of crashes the narrative for the Big 12 being mentioned among the better conferences. Because, of course, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to get their flowers. Also, speaking of perception, we have this weird perception that the SEC defenses are so much better than everybody else. But I have a theory that that's not quite true. They just have a bunch of stinky quarterbacks, so their defense can
Mm-hmm.
feast week to week. But then when you get someone like Jordan Travis out there, hypothetically, he torches you up and down the field. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
perception I'm pushing pretty hard this year. But
As you
yeah,
should.
I think the narrative's already been written about the Big 12. They're not very good, and if they do get a team in the playoff, it's probably going to be one of the teams that are departing for the SEC. So the SEC is going to take credit for that as well. So it's going to be a rough year narrative wise for the Big 12, especially the Pac 12 looks so good. The kind of the Big 12's hope is that those top 4 Pac 12 teams just eat each other up.
Yep.
And then you get 2 teams in Arlington with 1 or less losses and salvage the narrative there. One of at least a couple of teams to Arlington that are staying with the conference, I should add. And then the Big Ten's going to be what it is. I think Penn
Yep.
State's definitely up there, but 2-3 team conference.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. And and to dig into it quickly, just that's the one loss we didn't mention in our initial pre-log was West Virginia losing to Penn State. For West Virginia, there's nothing wrong with losing to Penn State, even remotely. Penn State's a quality football team and have been for a long time. If they have their fans and Coach Franklin seem to have a weird beef with each other now and then. But, what's fascinating, though, is that West Virginia, for Coach Brown, I mean, I'm amazed he came back another year, and they're going to have to put it together relatively quickly. This loss they can live with. They were competitive at moments. They're going to have to put together some wins. Otherwise, Coach Brown's just not going to make it. So no shame in losing this week, even remotely. But again, sometimes how you lose too, fans notice if a team gives good effort, maybe it's just the talent is there versus we're just going to lay over and let this team take it to us.
Yeah, I don't think even the most aggressive of West Virginia fans probably didn't expect them to go take care of business against Penn State. I will say, that backyard brawl is going to be a good opportunity for him here in a couple of weeks. Playing Pittsburgh in Morgantown, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yep,
You
in
are.
Morgantown.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
I mean, it's a big momentum boost if he can pick up that win, and then pick up a couple wins in the Big 12, go to a bowl game. Maybe that saves you. Maybe, I could see the value in keeping stability while you can, even if you're not necessarily building high end momentum with the new fold of the conference. But it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Because the thing with the Big 12 is that there's so many teams that are right by each other. And so it's like, well, BYU, they're good. Houston, they won 8 games last year. And like, if those are the bottom feeders of this conference with the West Virginia, I mean, that's going to be a tough battle week in, week out just to pick up any wins.
It will be. And that will be the nature of the beast with the Big 12 this year. And that very cliche of no easy wins or all that. But, the floor of the conference, like the projected worst teams in the conference this year are still expected to be competitive and fight. So there's no more Kansas isn't that doormat anymore.
Yeah.
Kansas is a competitive quality football program that made a bowl game last year. So that floor is higher. And if you play a clunker, you're going to lose. If you play bad, you're going to give yourself a high shot to lose in this new era of the Big 12. Or maybe a few years ago, you could get away with playing bad against Kansas and still win. So it's a different time. It's a good time.
Yeah, as far as conferences, I always perceived, obviously, the SEC is what it is. The Big Ten's always the most top-heavy schools with the worst floor, I think, and the worst middle shelf of all the conferences. The Pac-12 probably has the most good teams. I think the Big 12 has the fewest really bad teams. I mean, obviously, even Iowa State last year, 4-8, that wasn't a bad team. It's just that they play in a conference where it's really tough to grind out wins. I mean, they beat Iowa, they beat UNI. So, I mean, they won a state championship. That's got to count for something.
That's darn right. You're darn right. Where we hang it in the rec center. We got it right there. We're Iowa State champions. So I wish the unions would come out and support that too.
And we talked last week about Iowa State. Of course, in-state rival coming to town. That's always a little bit dicey as far as, how is that going to look? There's a lot of uncertainty with losing a lot of players, both, throughout football and then also the sports betting scandal. But they came out strong. I'm really impressed. The Iowa State folks on my Twitter, shout out Cyclone Larry. He was, on the soapbox telling us that Iowa State's not going to be that bad. This gambling thing's not going to impact them as much as more casual fans think it's going to. And then he also made it very clear, UNI stinks, so this one shouldn't be an issue. And he was right.
Yeah, no, he was right. And I had doubts last week. I did, and rightfully so. It's been a off season that's not filled with let's talk football and positional charts. It's been anything else for Iowa State football this off season. So to go out on Saturday, see the team play a really clean game, and they did in a way they're going to have to probably do to find some wins this season, which is defense, special teams, and the offense avoid the mistakes, move the football, and find a way to make it work. They were great defensively. Jeremiah Cooper had a big day, pair of interceptions, the touchdown as well. They were able to get to the quarterback 5 times. And offensively, look, Rocco Bright had a really nice, first career start, simple, nothing flashy. They were able to get some good running as well. That said, though, they've traditionally struggled against UNI, so for them to go out and just take care of business was refreshing. That said, though, I'm not saying UNI is a terrific team this year. That remains to be seen. But they got the win, and we're going to see what kind of momentum is built before, Cyhawk week this week. So it should be that's always a wild atmosphere, always a lot of energy. And Iowa will be ranked, which will always give a little more juice as well. And hopefully for Iowa State, they can find a way to use that formula again and find a win for sure.
Another thing that I noticed, I mean, of course, this isn't an Iowa slander podcast, but any podcast that I'm on eventually turns into an Iowa slander podcast. Of course, I was dialed into the TCU Colorado game at noon on Saturday, and you couldn't get my eyes off that, especially for Iowa, Utah State. But the timeline was going crazy because Iowa scored that first touchdown so quickly through the air. And then I saw the highlight. It was just broken coverage. It wasn't a good play by Iowa. It was a pitch and catch. If you can hit that play, then you're in real trouble. But yeah, that offense still stinks. Still couldn't get to 25 points per game. So Brian Ferentz had some catching up to do. Outstanding stuff. I think I feel so much better about Iowa State going into Iowa than is it in? No, it's in
Ames this year. It's Ames this year.
I mean, I think that's the
toughest. And Brennan, they
won
last year. Iowa State, as you mentioned, they won. So we'll find out. They haven't won in Ames in over a decade.
No, that's the toughest place to play in Iowa. I'll say that.
They need to change that narrative immediately. So we'll see if they can figure it out.
I think Ames gets so slept on, and I think Iowa City's overrated. I mean, it's cute for the 7th biggest stadium in the Big 12. It's definitely nice. It's cute. Yeah. I mean, 7th, that's top half, baby. In the conference, that's electric stuff.
We'll take it.
Absolutely.
We'll take it. Our 61-5 can't be beat.
Yeah, absolutely. Outstanding stuff. But we did put some predictions on paper that, maybe not as great of a week. Yeah. We just like the Big 12, we went 10-4 each. We each had TCU winning, each had Baylor and Texas Tech. All of those 20-point favorites. I felt like those were pretty good. And then of course we had Penn State beating them. I had UTSA beating Houston on the road. You had Sam Houston upsetting BYU in Utah.
I want to give Houston some credit. I mean, UTSA was a favorite in that game, and Houston, no one really knew what to expect from Houston coming into this first season of the Big 12. So for them to go out, find a way to win that football game, major for the conference and major overall. And it was a good pick by you. I mean, UTSA is a salty, salty crew. I just went with Dana Holgerson in the old school flow. He's trying to pretend that he can grow a mullet himself, but not everybody's Mike Gundy. But BYU, their defense is really salty. They're going to find some success that side this year. Sam Houston State defensively was what I thought they would be. Offensively, they were not very good, especially at the quarterback position. So, that's just how those two games kind of played out. And, for those two new members of the Big 12, let's give them kind of a tip of the cap, going 4-0 and making a positive impact early in the league with UCF's win over Kent State and then Cincinnati's win over Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah, and those were really good, dominant wins. Especially, I'm really impressed with Cincinnati because, I mean, first-year head coach, it feels like a cliche, and this feels like the easy take to make, but you can kind of come out slow, and that's okay. But they didn't, and they came out. They took care of business. UCF took care of business. John Reese Plumlee showed Heisman flashes. The whole game was Heisman flashes, but he definitely showed his peaks were really high. And then BYU and Houston both, not pretty games, not dominant games by any means, but still solid wins. And when you have teams like Baylor and Texas Tech and TCU all losing at home, you think, wow, man, I mean, that's the talking point of the conference, which I think is a lot more easy to redeem than if BYU and Houston were to bottom out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think UCF too, I'll give them a little love because, Gustavo Malzahn, I mean, he's trying to find a way to, they're going to play fast, they're going to play quick. Kent State's a MAC team. They're going to always fight. MAC's usually a quality conference. And the Golden Flashes were nothing golden in their week 1 game, but UCF played a really clean football game, and they were the highest of those 4 new additions to the conference this year in terms of preseason predictions. They were 8th, if I remember correctly. And so they really are a program that could do some damage this year. They've got a lot of speed. They got a lot of athleticism. They're in the upper half of the conference in those 2 departments. So it will be interesting to see kind of what that ceiling can be for them.
And you know what it looked like to me with those 2 games in particular is that it looked like Power 5 teams beating up on non-Power 5 teams. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what they're looking for, because they are Power 5 teams now. They've played like power teams here in the last few years, but you never know what that transition is going to look like. Are they still going to look like a Group of 5 team who's just playing against bigger schools now, or are they going to come right into the conference and be one of those teams and compete? And I think that's a great sign for both of those fan bases.
It is. And I'm curious where they, again, go throughout the season. If that QB play can hold up, do they find some defense? All these, I mean, you have to have all these things usually work in harmony to find wins on the field.
But overall here, UTSA Houston and BYU and Sam Houston, those are tough games to really gauge, because I mean, neither of us are very familiar with either of those. I mean, any 4 of those teams really. Only seen them in flashes. But with the other 12 games, I feel like we had a good beat on it. It's just that, I mean,
it just happens. Hey, that's football. I mean, you're dead right though. It's interesting that TCU, we felt great. Baylor, I didn't think even remotely about it. Thought that was easy. Texas Tech, I thought could have gotten into a little trouble just because it's a road game and a funny atmosphere. But shoot, that's an 8-win program last year, and I thought they'll find a way to get it done. Might slug a little bit, but Wyoming found the right pieces. They have to give it, to them on that. But overall, in a way, a disappointing week for the Big 12, but I still think some positivity as well. You look at Kansas really taking it to Missouri State. OU crushes Arkansas State. Texas gets over Rice. Kansas State had a nice week 1 performance, a shutout against Southeast Missouri State that probably won't do a lot this year, but they took care of business. Oklahoma State, same thing, took care of their damage, easily win. So you kind of look at those full slate, and outside of really that Baylor game, that's just a game you just feel like they've got to win, no questions asked. Big 12 took care of their business in terms of teams they are just absolutely supposed to beat on paper. So you could look at it and say not a bad week, but when you kind of dig in, you realize your best team last year loses at home week 1 to a team that went 1-11. I know there's so much behind that, but they're going to have to make some adjustments in week 2, and that'll be a big week upcoming.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The conference as a whole did very well, and a lot of those teams who needed to take care of business took care of business. A couple of teams slipped up against a team that they probably should have taken care of, but overall, 10-4 is a good place to be. It is unfortunate that narrative's going to be written about the Big 12 so early and so tough to overcome. But overall, good week. Week 2 is going to be great. We'll break that down here later this week. But any final takeaways from week 1 other than just college football is back?
College football is back, and this is a Big 12, podcast, so we always stay majority in the Big 12. But I also always like to touch just on other things throughout, just because they do play an ultimate impact. Last night, or Sunday night, Florida State, taking it to LSU, and that was a very interesting game to me, just in terms of making a standpoint there. So that's something to kind of take away. SEC, had a couple of losses that they weren't projecting. I think every conference had a couple of disappointing losses. Big Ten had some interesting games too, and we won't mention unfortunate tragedies from last Thursday night, for example, but this is going to be a great season, and I'm curious if those headlines of realignment can ultimately change the narrative. Will it stay that narrative throughout the season? And I think it's going to an extent. But it was nice to just get back on the field, play football. People can get angry all they want, yet Saturday afternoon, Saturday night comes on, you flip on that TV, you see college football. That's a tough feeling to overcome.
Nothing better. And another big takeaway that I had before we wrap up, now we get Big 12 after dark. I mean, BYU is playing until after midnight here. I mean, this is great stuff. Big 12 starting at 11 a.m. here Central Time, going all the way through midnight. I mean, that's outstanding.
I can't tell you how nice it was to catch, live the OTs of that Wyoming Texas Tech game, because it was late, or it felt late. It wasn't, but
yeah,
it was just fun to hit that and be like, this is what we're gonna get. And it's a very niche group, that after dark crowd, that 10 o'clock at Central Standard, that game gets going. But it's fun, though. It's fun to just watch a nice, not the best college game of the week, but just an average college game. Maybe some people are throwing down some wagers. You're doing what you can. You're just having a good time, and it's not a bad thing whatsoever. So, in terms of marketability, Big 12 continues to do a good job in that. And this will be a good season where they still got their old two power weights that have really dictated the conference, especially Oklahoma the last decade, not necessarily Texas.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be a good test for them to see if they can kind of start to learn on their own. And next year will be very exciting when we get to that 16-team group. But there's a lot of football and sports in general to play this year.
And week 2 coming up, we'll break that down here later this week. But lots of great games: Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Iowa State, as we alluded to there. Oklahoma, SMU. SMU shows the flashes. They're going to be a Power 5 team next year, which seems very silly to me. Oregon, Texas Tech, they play. UCF and Boise State, another opportunity for them to really show that they're a Power 5 football school. Boise State's good, but you got to take care of business there. Texas and Alabama wrapping up that electric slate. I can't wait for that game.
That's going to be a great game. I don't. You're just, if you're a football fan, you watch it. It's good content, and get rid of these neutral site games. I know it's fun for fan bases to travel to a random city and get to hang out, party, chill all weekend long, and hopefully their team wins. But from a viewership standpoint, get them to play in their own stadiums. Like Alabama going to Austin, Texas was weird last year, watching them play a non-conference road game. That just hasn't happened in a long time. And Texas doesn't do it a lot either. So I think it's great for college football. And Bryant-Denny Stadium is going to have it's a great college football stadium, but I think they're used to dominating. That it's tough for them to get hyped up for a game. That stadium will have some energy. That's guaranteed.
Absolutely. It's going to be electric there. Yeah. And if I were to counter that, I'd be like, well, you probably get more of these bigger matchups.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to go to the other team stadium. You don't have to do a home and home. You can kind of do these one-offs, or even like LSU and Florida State. Maybe that matchup doesn't happen if, LSU has to go into Tallahassee or Florida State. But you're absolutely right. College football is at its best when it's on campus. I think that's true for non-conference games. I think that's going to be true for playoff games. The more on conference, the better the product is, for sure.
Yeah. I also want to warn you as a preview to the upcoming show, ladies and gentlemen, that the Iowa State line for points total is 36.5. So I'm going to have a nice little monologue ready to go of how absurdly low that is considering modern day college football. And if I don't get a game, I expect a low scoring game again, but I just want to point out pretty low number on that.
Wait, is that the over-under or the point spread?
That's the over-under. Sorry.
Okay, I was like, wait a minute. I don't think Iowa's going to score 36.
Point spread's 4.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, it tells you about where Iowa is. A game away from the Big Ten championship game, and they're only 4-point favorites against little Iowa State. Huh? All right,
that's what I'm told. And they got their Michigan. They got their Michigan man at QB. So
absolutely.
So it's all good.
Perfect. Well, that'll wrap it up here. We'll have plenty of week 2 coverage coming up here. We got Bookie Brooke and the boys on the Cornhusker Connection Network. Brooke Byrne won a lot of money. I lost a lot. I was bad this week, I'll admit. I'll let you supposed
You'll make it back, Brandon. I have full faith.
Absolutely.
You always do.
It's a long season. Cornhusker Connection, a little bit sad stuff this week for sure, but plenty of fun stuff here on the Big 12 show. I'm Brandon Shanahan. This is Drew Russell.
Later, guys.